And we welcome into noise11.com Eddie Rayner, and to list the credits there from going way back to, even when Split Enz was ENDS, all the way through to Forensics, will take up all our time. So we'll just jump from Split Enz up there to talking about Forensics here. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's a great thrill for me to be able to say the words new music to you in the year 2022.
Well, I'm pleased that somebody else, it feels like me. I spend my days making new music, and it's very unusual that any of it sees the light of day. I mean, I don't know how many bands that I've produced or how many bands that I've been in or how many things I've written that I thought would have been like, had got a wee bit of exposure, just somehow fall through the cracks. I'm sure that happens to a lot of people.
Well, I was a big fan of the Makers at one point in my early radio days.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the Makers, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because Philip Mortlock signed the Makers to East West back in, I think, 88, 89, something like that. And he's now our kind of cheerleader for the Forensics project. And it's not like we'd been, in contact all that time, but we just reconnected maybe a couple of years ago, and he's been a champion for us. He's been brilliant.
Yes.
Helping to bring this project to fruition, yeah.
And hello to Phil Mortlock, one of the true nice men of the Australian music industry.
Yeah, he is that.
Yeah. Forensics is, I guess it's new music on a vintage platform, really, isn't it? It's sort of a reimagining of Split Enz. In some parts, very subtle, but in other parts, it's very obvious what you're doing.
Yeah, it's really the new Forensics album is, I'd say, 50-50 inspired by old Split Enz segments or samples or snippets, if you like, where I just take a small piece, going back over a lot of the old Split Enz stuff, going right back to Mental Notes, 1975. It was very complex music, and it was made up of so many different contributions musically from different people in the band, and very often those pieces would only be used once in a big long 7-minute song or something. And so Tim and I were thinking it's a shame if some of those great little snippets weren't made more of. So we just thought we'd have a go at it as a project. So we wrote, we didn't write, but we created about 15 or 16 different songs in that way, just by taking small snippets of the old music, and then I would make rhythm tracks up, new rhythm tracks from those pieces of music, and then send them over to him. He would do his vocals, contribute his new lyrics and his vocals, and then I'd mix the whole thing together and create a song out of it. And that's how 50-50, about 50% of the album was created. The other 50% was created with from another project that I was doing, which was my jamming band. It's a band called Double Life, and all we do is jam from nothing. The only rule being is that there's nothing to be written before anybody comes along. So we just play, just wind up in this room, and I'll just start playing, and then the others will join in, and before you know it, there's music being written out of the ether. And so I had all these rhythm tracks that particular band had written, all these instrumentals, if you like, which I sent to Tim, and Tim wrote a whole bunch of lyrics for those. So in the end, Tim and I had about 35 tracks comprised of those two projects, and we just made the Forensics album up out of those two projects.
Mm-hmm. And Noel Crombie is also involved in this.
Yeah, we asked Noel if he'd like to contribute some percussion, some drums, and he did. And I mean, there's nothing better than playing with Noel. He's so nutty, in so many ways, and when you jam with Noel, there's, you know, you're going to write something great. But we didn't jam with him on this stuff. He did his drums after the event and sent them to me. But Tim and I would, if we go out and play live, we'd love Noel to come and, you know, to do something with us live, if he's up for it.
Listening to where the DNA for Forenzics comes from, it's really spread across multiple albums. I guess the first three are sort of the nucleus of where you dug back to, but I also hear a bit of, you know, maybe in Premiere Foi, One Step Ahead, which was from the latter days.
Well, it's funny you say that, because Premiere Foi is one of the tracks that doesn't have any DNA in it, but just the fact that maybe I was playing on it, you're feeling a sense of that sort of Enz influence coming through it. Mm-hmm. Premiere Foi was just one of my jamming band's songs that ended up on this Forenzics album. So that was one of the ones that didn't have any Split Enz DNA. But you know, you've intuited something there.
Yes, well, obviously it has got a lot to do with the same person being on both tracks. Yeah, but the deliberate things, the deliberate songs like "Walking Down the Road" in "Walking," for instance. A little bit of "Spellbound" in "Chances Are." How did you decide what you were going to use as the DNA for those songs?
Well, there was such a broad palette of stuff to choose from. I just went, I'll try this bit. I'll try that bit. And there are so many pieces in the old Split Enz stuff. I mean, not just the old stuff. I mean, I dare say we could come right up to, the later stuff and pick and choose some bits and pieces from that, which would probably be more recognizable for most people. But there's so much in the old stuff. I mean, I could have gone on forever. As I say, we did about 15 songs like that, and hardly touched the surface, really.
Mm. This is not the first time you've reconstructed and deconstructed Split Enz. Those two Enzo projects from 25 and 21 years ago.
Oh, God, it's that long ago, man. Yeah, that was just another project. I guess. After Split Enz, I've sort of been lucky enough just to work from project to project and not have to, call music my living, because it isn't. But I think that was just my foray, my first and only foray into orchestral music. And I mean, I love doing orchestral music. I'm not a lot the wiser when it comes to writing music, in the classical sense. But I love the sound of the orchestra. The orchestra is an unwieldy thing. It's so unwieldy and it's so difficult. I mean, I probably should be a conductor to get the sort of feel that I want out of an orchestra. Because you can't tell an orchestra that you want it to feel good. If I said to the orchestra, it just doesn't feel right, they'd kind of look at me and say, well, how do you want us to play it? What's the word? What are the words? And I'd be struggling for those words because not being classically trained myself, I come from a more kind of popular music kind of idiom where you just say, well, I just want it to feel good. Just make it feel good, or that doesn't feel good. How do you articulate what feels good and what doesn't? Really, it is. Musicians know what feels good and what doesn't. So I often found myself wondering, why doesn't the orchestra know that it's not feeling right or it's not feeling good?
It's interesting you say that you came from a sort of a pop background, because with Split Enz, it was a fairly obscure band up until the third album. The third album was the one that had the first hit on it, being My Mistake, and that was a co-write that you wrote.
Yeah, I co-wrote it with Tim, yeah. That was after there was a bit of a tempestuous end at that point with Phil Judd leaving the band. We were in the middle of a very long and arduous tour, a classical thing to happen, really, where Tim and Phil got into a bit of argy-bargy after a gig, and Phil left, and Tim and I, this was 1977 actually, Tim and I went off together. I was his sidekick, and we went off to his uncle's place in Baltimore, and we basically wrote the album Dysrhythmia, and that was really Tim's first kind of foray into writing. And I was pretty much just helping him finish off bits and pieces, and doing arrangemental stuff, lots of arrangements and things, because that's probably my forte.
Yeah, well, that was the time when Split Enz, went from the art to the rock, and eventually became a pop band, I guess, by the time we got to the fifth album, True Colours. Was Neil Finn coming into the band sort of the instigator of a totally different sound and that pop era of Split Enz through the 80s? Yeah,
well, I mean, when Phil Judd left, Mike Chun, who was our bass player, he decided he was suffering from some quite bad depression and stuff, and he decided he would leave as well, and he suggested that we get Neil to play guitar from now on, from that point onwards, and we needed a bass player. So we got, instead of Mike Chun, that is, so we got Nigel Griggs on bass. So for all intents and purposes, it was quite a new band at that point. There was just really me, Tim and Noel left of the old band, and Malcolm Green had come in just a little bit prior, and Nigel and Neil came in, and Neil had never played guitar before, never played electric guitar before, to my knowledge. Well, it sounded like he'd never played it before anyway. And anyway, he was a great acoustic player, and he was a really good songwriter, even at 17 when he joined the band. And he just came in, and we just, in a way, took him under our wing, and there was a bit of a movement there for a while to get rid of Neil. Malcolm and Nigel thought he wasn't cutting it live as a guitar player, and he probably wasn't, but hey, he was just learning, So no, we persevered with Neil, and of course, rest is history. But of course, then when he started writing and contributing his songs to, I don't think he did much on Frenzy, which was after Dysrhythmia. I don't think he did a lot on that album. That was still mainly Tim songs. And then on True Colours, of course, he contributed I Got You and What's the Matter with You and Missing Person, a lot of the really big kind of pop classics,
So it was that third album where they gave you your first credit, and then every album subsequent to that, Frenzy, Double Happy, Whale, Pioneer, The Lost Cat. You really were the George Harrison of Split Enz, weren't you? They give you your moment.
I think they probably felt guilty. I don't know why they wanted to have an instrumental on every album, but it became our thing, that there was an instrumental on every record, and that was my thing. Probably giving a bit of a Stuart Copeland kind of effect. I think Stuart Copeland was given songs on Police albums, not because Sting wasn't writing enough songs, but just because sharing it around a bit, I guess. But instrumentals were always a big part of our show. Great way to start a show, a live show. Instrumentals. And I'm sure Nigel and Noel in particular love playing the instrumentals, which is what I've got happening these days with my band, Double Life. It's an instrumental jamming band, and it's probably what I mean. Singers, they never shut up. Always singing.
Well, you actually have one great singer on the Forensics album with Megan Washington making a guest appearance on Unlucky Friend. She'd worked with Tim before, hadn't she?
Yes, she had. I think she toured with Tim, and I don't know Megan. I've spoken to her only on over the email, but she seems like a very lovely girl and really quite funny. She's got a good sense of humour, and she's got a beautiful voice. and knows how to do it. She knows how to use her voice. And she sang on 2 tracks. That's Unlikely Friend, and what was the other one? It's escaped me, but she sang on 2 tracks.
Yeah, it's amazing that somebody who has such a prominent role on your album, you haven't even met face to face.
No, well, it's funny, this whole new way of working. I think some people thrive, you know, like myself. I love doing it this way. If you know, if I can sit by myself in my studio all day, I will do it to the, you know, to the end of my days. I love it. I also love playing in a collaborative sense with people as well. But there was always something I didn't like in Split Enz, and that was overdubbing on rhythm tracks when you were expected to come up with something really fantastic on a new song that you didn't know, that you hadn't had a chance to play live, so you hadn't had a chance to work out parts. And it was sort of, you know, you can't just turn on the muse, you can't turn on creativity. You know, it's either there on the day or it's not. And so it's quite a pressure. It's the same in a similar way to being a session guy. When you walk into a session and, you know, there's no music ever provided, you know, as in music to read, not that I can read anyway, but people normally say to me, if I do a session, they say, oh, just do what you do. Just, we love what you do. You just do what you do. And I don't know what I do. I don't know how to do what I do. You know, I just respond to things. But when people are sitting waiting for you to do something great, it's a pressure. And it's not great. That's why I love sitting by myself working. I can just carry on to my heart's content, you know, with nobody looking over my shoulder and waiting for that brilliance, which doesn't happen. Often doesn't happen.
Let's talk about one final thing before we head off. You got to play on a Paul McCartney album, Press to Play. I'm dying to know the story about how that happened.
Oh, well, it was funny. I was living in Melbourne at the time, and I just received a call at 3:00 in the morning. And he said, hi, it's Paul here. You know, excuse the accent. Would you like to come and play on my record? I was doing a record in the band. There was Pete Townsend and Phil Collins and Carlos Alomar and Eric Stewart from 10cc and Paul, of course, on bass. And I went over and sort of completed the band, and we played in he had a windmill on the south coast of England, down by Hastings, and the studio was built in the bottom of it. And we played there for like 3 weeks, and we did an album called Press to Play. And such good fun. Possibly not the, you know, his finest moment musically, but such a great guy, and amazing just to work with those players. Looking around and seeing those guys in the same room, thinking, "Oh my God, what am I doing here?" You know.
So I don't know whether he wants to get back documentary or not, but did you get a sense of when you were watching that, if you watched that when you were working with Paul McCartney, you know, was there a similarity between how he was working in Press to Play to how he was working with the Beatles back in the late 60s?
Well, it seemed to me, I watched the whole documentary, it seemed to me like he was pretty much fully in control. He knew what he wanted already, and a lot of frustration was coming out because, you know, when you're in a band, I'm sure there's always a main songwriter or a couple of main songwriters who kind of know what the song should be in their head, but who don't get that instantaneously from the band, and so they can feel quite, you know, there's pressure going on all around, you know, songwriter's not getting what he wants. The band members don't know what the songwriter's hearing because they can't get in his head and all that sort of thing. So I just sort of figure that you have to go through this process of, it's a very long-winded process, and there's a lot of talking shit going on, if you know what I mean. Excuse the language, but they just talk a lot, and there's a lot of kind of interplay, a lot of, you know, argy-bargy going on, and all sorts of and joking and carrying on. But unless you do go through that process, you're not going to wind up with the sort of thing that a band winds up with, you know. A band has a certain sound. A great band like that has an amazing sound, and any great band does have an amazing sound, but only comes about through that process, only comes about through that long-winded process, and you can't shortcut it, you know. And so yeah, I mean, it was pretty much like that when I was working with him. He's in the flesh. Paul is the guy you see when you're watching Paul McCartney do anything. He's just very affable and congenial and funny and very hospitable. And yeah, so it was a very flattering experience, the whole thing for me, and quite surreal. Yeah.
I bet. Well, Forensics is what we're all listening to at the moment, Shades and Echoes, the album. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Eddie. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you very much. We'll catch you next time.